Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. I'm your host, Larry Lawson, coming to you from the headquarters of the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation and Indian River Hauntings here in beautiful Vero Beach, Florida. If you'd like to find out more about my team and what we're doing, you can check us out at paranormalfbi.com or indianriverhauntings.com. You can also check out our YouTube channel at Indian River Hauntings 2341. You'll see some of the content that we put up. If you'd like to get a hold of me, maybe you've got some questions, some comments you'd like to make about the show, or questions you have about the paranormal, you can get a hold of me at ghostguy@paranormalstakeout.org and just send me a message there, and we'll bring it on at the beginning of each show. So, hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving and they're getting all tuned up for the Christmas holidays coming. It's a lot really cold up in the north end of this country right now. We've had a little cold snap here. I think we hit the 80s today, but it's been in the 70s and 60s here recently. I know my friends up north are going to shoot me for that comment. But let's get into tonight's show. I got a great guest tonight. I've got researcher, investigator, author, podcast host, producer, and director Mike RICKSECKER. Mike has over 30 years of researching unexplained paranormal phenomena across the globe. He is a native of Cleveland, Ohio, a Buckeye like myself, and a veteran serving our country in the United States Air Force. He's also been on a number of television shows. He's been on Discovery Channel, History Channel, Travel Channel, Animal Planet, and Gaia TV. So a breadth of experience and information here. I'd like to welcome Mike RICKSECKER to the show. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, Larry. Thanks so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate it.
I'm very excited to have you on. We've got a lot to talk about, and but I'd like my audience to kind of get to know who you are a little bit. Can you kind of share with us how you began your journey into paranormal research?
Yeah, absolutely. Like a lot of people, I was an experiencer, and that's really where my curiosity began. It goes all the way back
Mhm.
to when I was a child, about 8 years old, and my first really significant paranormal experience was with what we would call a shadow person. But I had no idea about that at the time. I'd woken up in the middle of the night and there's this tall, dark figure standing in the corner of my bedroom, and I didn't know anything about, shadow entities or anything like that at the time. I thought there was an intruder in the house and,
Mhm.
they'd broken in to rob the place, maybe kill me. That's where my mind goes at 8 years
Sure.
old. And, fortunately, I'm still alive to tell the tale, which is great. But it did do something very unusual. So I see the thing, I'm trying to scream because I'm scared, but I'm so frightened that just my mouth opens up and nothing comes out. I'm just too
Mm.
terrified. It approached my bed, leaned over, and I'm staring into this blank black face. There's nothing there. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, nothing. And again, still trying to scream, but nothing comes out. He ends up grabbing me by the wrists, crosses my arms across my body, and then runs off down the hall. And, a moment later, I found my voice, found my legs, run off screaming in my parents' bedroom. And, they're trying to console me, calm me down, trying to tell me that I just had a bad dream. But I knew I hadn't had a bad dream. I had been awake for this whole thing. Now, I'd never call that a haunted house. This was just a one-off incident in that particular house. There are a couple other little things that I had seen, maybe before that, but it's hard to know because I was so young. But about 5 years later, we had moved to another house. We had been originally from Ohio, but when I was 3, we had moved to Massachusetts. Spent 10 years there, moved back to Ohio, and that particular house had a bit more going on with it, where unpacking boxes, putting things away in my new bedroom, and I kept seeing this figure in my doorway. And I turn and look, and off it would go. And this kept happening. I'd be unpacking boxes, putting things away, and to see the figure, I'd turn and look, and it would just run off toward my parents' bedroom. I don't know what was going on. This happened several times over the course of the first few days that we were there. So I decided to ask my mom about it, and she admitted that she had also seen this thing,
Mm.
which was great for me. It was an affirmation that I wasn't crazy. And she said it in such a way that, she didn't seem very concerned about it. So okay, mom's not alarmed. Mom's not scared about it. She's just, kind of like, yeah, it's there. So I didn't become scared about it either. Actually, I playful with the thing and started calling him Tom, like peeping Tom. So anytime he'd show up at my doorway, I said, hi, Tom. and off we go, running down the hallway somewhere. And that activity subsided after a few months. And so I just chalked it up to something that was there, curious about the new family, and it just went about its business after that. So those were my first really significant experiences. The following year, when I was a freshman in high school, was my first little paranormal investigation. And again, I had no idea, what that was. We're talking, it was 1989, and
Mm.
there weren't the ghost shows. You didn't know about ghost
Yeah.
hunting, investigating, that sort of thing. This was before all of that. I mean, it existed and people did it, but it wasn't very wide known. You had Hans Holzer, who I did read some Hans Holzer.
Mhm.
You had the Warrens, and then there were some small teams kind of scattered about. But yeah, my friend David and I were at our friend Lori's house, just shooting the breeze, talking teen drama, all that sort of stuff. And she lived in an older historic house in the downtown area of Worcester, Ohio, where we lived. And all of a sudden, she says, "I think my house is haunted." Oh, okay. This is interesting. This is cool. Tell us some stories. So she starts telling some stories about the house. There's like an old family cemetery back behind the house and things that go on. But then her most concerning thing was in her bedroom. She had this one wall that she couldn't tack up anything on. That we're talking like posters and things that a teen girl would put on her wall. And so, she put it up there about a day, a week, maybe even an hour later. The thing would always down, whatever it was. So, okay, well, we're going to go check it out. We're going to investigate.
Mhm.
So we go up there and we're taking a look at the room, taking a look at the wall. Lori keeps telling us some more stories. And my friend David, he put his hand flat to the wall like that. And all of a sudden, he started sweating profusely and he turned this bright, bright red. And I'm looking at David like, oh my gosh, what in the world is going on? I've never seen anything like this before. So he starts going like wall to wall in the house, trying to find the kind of quote unquote hot spots. And that was the moment that I knew, and I didn't know what it was, but I
Mhm.
knew that somehow, some way, shape, or form, I was going to be involved in this sort of phenomenon for the rest of my life. And that's where I started, like, whatever book that I could get my hands a hold of. Which we were in a small town, so it wasn't too much. But fortunately, once kind of uh, the internet came along, you kind of
Yep.
connect with people and that sort of thing. That's kind of really when it started to flourish.
So, obviously, you got connected with, spirits, ghosts, if you will. What's your focus these days, and how did you get there? Did you decide to expand your horizons and just decide to find out what other experiences were out there?
Yeah, over the years, I just kind of noticed and realizing all this different phenomena that we're talking about, whether it's ghosts and spirits, UFO activity, cryptids, interdimensional beings.
Mhm.
They're all connected. They're all interrelated to each other. I always had a fascination with, I do a lot of stuff on ancient history, lost civilizations, that sort of thing as well. And I'd always had a fascination with that as a kid, with all
Mhm.
the history. You grew up in the school system in Massachusetts, and history is a big thing, the American Revolution and all of
Absolutely.
that. And then I was fortunate enough in high school where I had a couple of really good history teachers for world history and U.S. history that were very, very good storytellers. So I was always fascinated in that. And then early 90s, 1993, the Mysteries of the Sphinx documentary comes out with
Mhm.
Robert Schock and John Anthony West. Charlton Heston was the host for that,
Yeah.
basically redating the Sphinx. I'm like, oh, wow, that's fascinating. And then it wasn't even a year later, the movie Stargate came out. So,
That
putting
was
those two together, so I was fascinated by that as well. In the midst of, I'm still fascinated and interested with the paranormal activity. I was stationed in Alaska at the time, and there are things going on down in the communication center in our back offices and everything. So, and many of us were actually experiencing and seeing these different things. So, it was like this soup of different activity, different interests. And, as I, ended up becoming a paranormal investigator, and I've always been a writer. I've been doing that since I
Mhm.
was in second grade, and so I'm writing about these things, giving presentations, and
Ah, okay.
people are sharing their experiences with me. We're experiencing things on investigations. I'm talking with people at different events and realizing there are a lot of similarities between all of this different phenomena. So let's try to connect the different pieces.
Okay.
What fits here?
And you know what I find really interesting is so many people that find themselves in this field start off as, history enthusiasts.
Mhm.
So many folks that, understand and you can't really appreciate what this whole phenomenon is if you don't love and enjoy history and embrace
Yeah,
history. So I get it, and, one thing you have a very common thread too that you had experience as a kid,
right.
and I find that very, very common. Me, I my first experience was when I got in law enforcement, oddly enough. I didn't have anything really significant that I can recall happened as a kid, but you have a story very, very similar to most in that you had your first experiences when you were young and your mind probably wasn't as cluttered as it is, once we hit adulthood.
Right, exactly. And
So
I've noticed that as well. There's a lot of people in law enforcement that get involved with investigating and research because
oh,
they see and experience things while out there on the job.
well, and what's interesting is early on, and you see a lot of this with, pilots, for example, in
Mhm.
UFOs, you
Yeah,
see and experience stuff, you don't say anything. Back when I started on the job, you didn't say anything. You just kept it to yourself
exactly.
because your boss would send you for a fit for duty eval.
Mhm.
Nowadays, it's changed, and you'll find many folks in law enforcement talking about it. We're creating a group right now of nothing but law enforcement officers and military personnel, uh, that have experienced this. We're actually creating an organization along those lines right now because we are talking about it quite a bit more.
Yeah,
And
which
it's
is
it
which is great because you're right. Back in the day, when okay, we're all experiencing something down here in the comm center and like I said, the back office area,
uh,
but you didn't want to bring it up the chain of command at all. It got as high as
ooh,
maybe some couple of master sergeants down there. You kind of whispered it amongst each other because you were worried about your security clearance. You didn't want to find yourself down there at mental
absolutely,
health and have your
abs
security clearance pulled away. And
well,
then, yeah, with pilots, it's the flight status. They don't want to lose that.
absolutely. Well, we gotta take our first break now, but when we come back, I wanna talk a little bit more about this, and I wanna get into a very interesting part of what you study, and that's time. So folks, stay with us. I got Mike Ricksecker with us. Stay with us, and we'll be back after these messages. And we are back with my guest, Mike Ricksecker. What a interesting beginning to this conversation, and getting back to our previous lives in service. It's just amazing how many of us have had things. I mean, I've read a lot of experience of those in the military, and there's a military base. I want to say it's up in Northern California or somewhere in the Northwest, where they've had a lot of interesting things happen on the base, and the military officers and enlisted men are just now beginning to speak about it. So I think I would like to learn more about what some of our folks in our fields have experienced and have never talked about. I'm sure the stories out there abound.
Oh, yeah,
So,
absolutely. Stories people have sat on for decades, because
mhm,
of the stigma attached with, being an experiencer and having this phenomenon for so long. If you talked about these sorts of things, you were some sort of kook or quack. I mean, long ago, you might even find yourself in a straitjacket somewhere, and they throw away the key. So yeah, people are very, very careful about that sort of thing.
And I think the key, and this is just me and my soapbox a little bit, is going to be to find a way to collaborate with people and present evidence to show the other side. And that's kind of where I want to go with you next, because
Yeah.
one of the most fascinating things out there is the issue of time and how that affects all of the phenomenon, whether it be cryptozoology, ghosts, UFOs. Time seems to be part of it. Mike,
Right.
define
Yeah.
what is time? What is time in your opinion?
Well, time doesn't really exist. Time is a human construct. It's a measuring tool that we developed to keep track of things, to keep some sort of
Mhm.
order, to know when to plant the crops, keep track of the seasons, to know when to show up at the bus stop or to catch a flight or when to show up at work at the right moment so your supervisor doesn't get upset with you. So it's a measuring tool to keep track of our reality. We came up with this, but it doesn't really exist. It's not really there. It's part of what we call the fourth dimension, which is what our consciousness, that's where that resides. And what's fascinating about that is our consciousness is while it's in the fourth dimension, it resides in a three-dimensional body. So everything that we experience and we can interact with are all those dimensions that are below us. First dimension's a line, second dimension is a plane, basically like a flat surface. Then we have third dimension, that's different objects. Fourth is time. But our theoretical physics show us that there are up to 11 hyperspatial dimensions from 0 to 10. 0 is a point, by the way, and that one's controversial, but theoretical physics shows up to 11 dimensions. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, what's fifth, sixth, seventh, and so forth? And if we are able to experience all those dimensions that are below us, then those dimensions that are above us would be able to experience all of our current dimension as well, which is time. So they would see time as an object, as something that is whole and complete. That tells us all time is actually concurrent. It's all here right now. We are trapped within what we call the river of time. And it's a nice analogy, because there's this constant flow. We experience it in a very, very linear type fashion. But if we're going to use that analogy of water, of a river, time is the water, but what's controlling it really is the banks. The banks are keeping the water in to keep the flow going in one direction. But if you were to remove the banks, that control piece, then all that water, all time would spill out and become a stagnant lake. It would all be there in one location, and you could move about it at will. Another way to look at it is take a small town that you might be driving through, and maybe it's a couple miles long. You're driving through about 35 miles per hour. There's a couple of houses, maybe a little store, gas station, a church, that sort of thing. It takes you about 5 or 10 minutes to drive through the thing. So that's a time relationship with the town. Now, from another perspective, let's say you're in an airplane flying over that same town, and you look out the window and you see it all at once. The houses, the store, the gas station, the church, the road, all there. And what you once had a time relationship with, you now have a relationship with it in space, all there concurrent.
Mm-hmm. Ah, I see I see. Now, this goes a lot back to what Einstein talked about also, if I'm not mistaken. Um, Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Einstein, he had the idea of what he called the block universe, that everything is concurrent like this. And so when I started the research for this, it just honestly, Larry, it popped in my head about 20 years ago. I'm doing some investigative work, I'm doing some research, and it just kind of pops in my head. What if as people are experiencing all this phenomena, what if all time is concurrent? What if it's all there happening at the exact same moment, and we're just not seeing it at the same time, because everything is frequency, resonance, energy, vibration, and maybe these things are happening on different frequencies. And so I went down that road, found the information about Einstein's block universe. Like, okay, Einstein had a lot of similar ideas and concepts on this when he's talking about his space-time continuum. Where I take it a little bit further than that, though, is I have what I call stacked time theory, and that all time is concurrent. So take where you're sitting right now. Every moment that has happened, is happening, and will happen are all right there right now. And each of those moments is like a photograph in this big stack of photos. Two of those photos, or two of those moments, on occasion will resonate at the same frequency for a moment, because again, everything's frequency, resonance, vibration. They'll resonate the same frequency for a moment and will bleed into each other. And that's where we start seeing things we might think is a ghost or some sort of haunting. We might see, like the Victorian woman, and while. But then she turns and looks at us and reacts to us as if we're the ghosts. And so that's more of what we'd call a time slip.
I see. Now, and when those dimensions sit next to each other, the only issue I have with that is the stories that we have of Grandma Ann coming back and saying, "Don't worry, I'm okay in heaven."
Mhm.
And we've got stories similar to that. How would that fit with those dimensions crossing into each other or fading into each other?
Yeah, again, you're talking about another dimension, wherever it is that we pass on to.
Mhm.
Call it the home world. We want to call it heaven, whatever that is.
Okay.
It is either another dimension, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, one of those, or
Mhm.
it is something even further beyond. We get into the idea of a simulated universe. Well, the dimensions would be a part of that simulation, but the
Yeah, I think we lost you here for just a second, Mike. Hopefully, you'll be back in just a quick second. Um, Very interesting conversation along those lines. I had an interesting conversation with my mother-in-law today about heaven. My father-in-law was a deacon in the Catholic Church, and we were talking about heaven, and we discussed. Oh, there you are.
oh, there we go. Okay, just
Yep.
had a little blip over here. Okay,
So sorry. Anyway, what I was explaining to the audience
yeah,
while we had the little time slip there, if you
mhm,
will,
yeah,
um, was I had a conversation with my mother-in-law today. My
mhm,
father-in-law, who God rest his soul, has left us, but he was a deacon in a Catholic church. So my mother-in-law and I have these philosophical discussions, and she got talking about purgatory today. I'm Baptist by background, and we got talking about purgatory and how that is a place where the soul goes to get cleansed before uh, going on to heaven. At least that's what the theory is. But my question to her was, could that just be a dimension? Is heaven a dimension? Is purgatory a dimension that we pass through? And is that where the stories come from because of people that have experienced that crossing of dimensions?
yeah,
Thoughts?
absolutely. Yeah, it could certainly be another dimension. And what's fascinating about this? I mentioned simulated universe a moment ago, and so many of our ancient religions talk about this. They just don't use the word
Mhm.
simulation, but they talk about if you go down the route of reincarnation. We come from someplace, we come down here, we live out of life, learn some lessons, pass away, go back up, and then we recycle back through it again, like we're logging in and out of some sort of program. Like you
Mhm.
mentioned, moving through purgatory, moving to heaven. So you're here preparing for another world, for these other worlds beyond. So they could be other dimensions, they could be other universes, something that's even further beyond this sort of thing. And
Mhm.
those locations are outside the scope of time. They are above our dimension, so they can move in and about at will. So when we have a visitation from a loved one like that, time is time is nothing to them. They've already passed into that to that other dimension. They've left this one, even if we talk like ghosts and things like that. Okay, that is
Mhm.
the consciousness. That's the soul outside the body. So
Mhm.
again, our consciousness is in the fourth dimension. The body's the third. So it loses the third dimensional shell. The consciousness is still here on Earth, roaming around for whatever reason. Like my grandfather stuck around for a while until my grandmother passed away, and then they went on. Some people might even call it ascension. They've ascended into another realm, another dimension, that sort of thing. But they have the option to come back down into this dimension and interact.
So getting back to your stacked theory where you've got the
Mhm.
photographs, I actually like that analogy, the stacked photographs, and sometimes
Yeah.
the photographs meld. But do the photographs have that consciousness that
So
meld
the
together?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say that the photographs, like the moments themselves, have
Right.
a consciousness. Although some people would argue that Earth has a consciousness. So
That's a whole
um,
different show.
that's a whole other can of
Yeah.
worms. Um, but so they each have the moments have energy. They all have a basically frequency
Mhm.
that they are. that they were attuned to. And sometimes those frequencies will basically tune into each other, and you'll get
Okay.
a glimpse of that. Sometimes you might actually tune into yourself at another moment.
Doppelganger.
And we have the doppelganger incidents, and they're
We'll
not
talk about that in a few
yeah,
talk about that in a few
exactly.
minutes.
Yeah.
Um, but what I want to get at here is we're talking and we're just about to take our next break, but I want to give this let you chew on
Mhm.
this a little bit while want to take our next break. You have the photographs that may meld and we may see another moment in time coming through, but then we've got that consciousness coming through saying, "Hey, it's Aunt Katie. I'm back. I just want to let you know I'm okay." How what I'm not sure I understand the difference between that energy and those photographs melding, if you want to use that analogy.
Yeah, so Aunt Katie,
But
who's already passed away.
before we get into that, we gotta take
All
our
right,
break here. So chew on that a
gotcha.
little bit.
Okay.
When we come back, I'll have you answer that question. Folks, stay with us. Mark Ricksecker, interesting conversation. Don't go anywhere. So we're back with my guest, Mike Ricksecker, and we're talking about time. Now, I cut you off before you had a chance to answer that question, but I gave you a couple seconds to think about it. What do you think? What's
Yeah, so in that situation, Aunt Katie, who's already passed on,
Mhm.
is outside of time. So take like okay, us right now. I have a desk in front of me and say, all those photographs are stacked up in front of me right now, and I'm Aunt Katie. I could pick and choose where on that stack I would want to go. So if I want to go see, Mike in 2023, well, that's this photo in this stack, and I access that.
So the conscious we'll just use the term consciousness
Mhm.
for definition here, has the opportunity to pick and choose when they're what dimension they go back to visit or where they go back to visit.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, all right. We mentioned a word that I've found interesting, and I first heard it. Oh God, it was an old TV show. First heard the term doppelganger.
Mhm.
It might even have been Star Trek. Now that I think about it, way back when. But that whole concept of a doppelganger or seeing oneself again has always been fascinating to me. Is that actually a rift in time? You mentioned it briefly, but I'd like you to kinda talk about that some more.
Yeah, I think more of what we're experiencing here are time slips that we are actually experiencing ourselves at another moment in time. The word doppelganger is a German word, means double walker, and because people were experiencing seeing themselves or seeing a person walk into a room one moment, and then a minute later that they go again, the exact same thing happening.
Mhm.
The Norse tradition called those Vartigers, but the more common name is the German doppelganger. And over time, as people didn't understand the phenomenon, there was legend and lore and things like that placed on top of it. So it became like this whole evil twin sort of thing. But when you actually look at the stories, now I'll give a couple examples. It seems to be more of a time slip. So one of the more famous stories, do a Google search on doppelganger, you will find the story of the famous poet Goethe. Uh, and he recounted this in his book Dichtung und Wahrheit, or in English, Poetry and Truth. And he was on a road one day walking toward Dressenheim, which is town in Germany. He's having an affair with a young woman there, and he's lost in his thoughts as he's walking down the road. And all of a sudden, he notices on the other side of the road, walking the opposite direction, was this man in a gold trimmed gray suit. And so as he turned to get a better look at the guy because he thought the suit was interesting, the man just disappeared into thin air. It's like, what in the world was that? There's nothing to be done for it. The guy completely disappeared. So Goethe continues on his way, but notes it in the back of his mind. But a couple of years later, he's kind of forgotten about the incident. He's been up to other things. And now this time he's walking from Dressenheim, headed in down the same road in the opposite direction. He gets around that spot and it hits him. He looks down at himself. Oh my gosh, I'm the guy in the gold trimmed gray suit. I'm actually wearing it right now. So that, yeah, it's a doppelganger incident
Mhm.
because it's himself twice at the same spot, and then he saw himself. But to me, it's a time slip, and because he saw himself, a couple years later is what it was. And I think what happened here We're talking frequency, energy, vibration,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. He
Yep.
had been in kind of a partial meditative state, being lost in his thoughts, or today we call it zoning out, right? We do it all the time, which is not a good thing. When we're like driving down the road and we get lost in our thoughts, we zone out a bit and we miss our turn, or we miss our exit.
Yep.
Doctor, I got to go back and get that exit. It's a type of meditative state. And I believe what happened is he had gotten to that little bit of a meditative state there. And when he entered that area, he was able to tune into his own frequency there at another moment in time. And he caught a glimpse of it. And as he noticed this individual over there, which eventually figured out to be himself, and turned to get a better look, he broke that meditative state and then lost the image of himself.
In that meditative state, he literally traveled between dimensions, for lack of a better word, and saw himself.
Yeah, it ended up being like this bleed over of two different moments in time. Yeah.
One of my favorite stories on, time slips was, and, the names now escape me, but it was, 2 young ladies that were in France, and they went to the, not the
Yeah.
Louvre, but, the gardens.
Versailles.
Versailles,
Yeah.
thank you very
The
much.
Versailles time
And
slip. Yeah.
yeah, and that's probably one of my favorite stories, but that isn't so much them seeing themselves as much as it is traveling to a different dimension, but from
Right.
what you're describing, it's basically the same theory.
It's very similar. Yeah. So
Mhm,
instead of tuning into their own energy and their own frequency, they basically had tuned into a moment out of it was around the time of the French Revolution. Now, these were
mhm,
uh, two highly educated school mistresses. They were each running uh, universities at the time, which was really unheard of, back then at that time.
mhm,
These were two, pioneers in their field for women. And the one, it was Eleanor Jourdain and Annie Moberly, and I'm going to forget which is which, but the one had invited the other to France because they were going basically team up to run the one particular school. And so they're getting to know each other and went to Versailles just as an afternoon. Let's go down there. The one had a flat in Paris, and they
mhm.
decided to go down to Versailles. And so it was just an afternoon stroll in the gardens there, and they saw this whole scene play out before them, where again it looked like something out of the French Revolution.
Mhm. And, I had a guest on, a few weeks ago that experienced something similar in a little town of, Stuart, Florida, where herself and another friend walked out of a restaurant, and they were in another time, and
Mhm.
it stayed like that for a few minutes, and then it snapped back. It's easy to say they're crazy. It's easy to say that,
Yeah,
and but it keeps happening.
it does. One of my favorite stories is from the house that we call the Conjuring house now, the farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island, where that
Mhm.
was the first Conjuring movie was based off of.
Right.
Now, what happened there during the haunting of the parents was 10 years time, and so it's very very different than the movies. And I'm very good friends with
Mhm.
with the family, but Andrea and Carolyn will say of all the things that happened there at the house, all the crazy things. The thing that was the most fascinating was one evening. It was just after the seance that had gone bad with the Warrens,
Right. Mhm.
and uh, Andrea was up doing some homework, and Carolyn had woken up. She hadn't eaten dinner that night. She asked Andrea, "Can you reheat some of that stew and put on a short pot of coffee?" So Andrea's like, "Okay, yeah, I'll go take care of that." Carolyn's sitting in the parlor area, looking out into the dining room, which is the area where the seance had gone bad. And all of a sudden, she sees morph into existence there in that room is a family like out of the 1700s. You have a woman cooking over an open hearth, which at that time in the 70s, uh, that fireplace had been boarded up for like 100 years. But there it is, all of a sudden, a raging fire. There's a woman cooking over it, a couple of kids running around, and two gentlemen sitting at a table there with pewter steins. And they turn and they look at Carolyn and they see her sitting there because one nudges the other and says, "Hey, would you look at that?" And points over there at Carolyn as if she was the ghost. And then the moment kind of subsided there. But yeah, of all the crazy things that happened at that house, like that's the most significant because you had the future looking at the past and the past looking at the future.
And that does beg an interesting conversation on time travel itself.
Mhm.
Do you think we're ever going to be able to create a tool, a mechanism that will allow this free travel between?
Yeah, so given all of these, different types of accounts, I think real time travel is going to have more to do with the consciousness, with the mind, than
Mhm.
something like a DeLorean and a flux capacitor. I don't necessarily believe it's going to be a machine that will do it. I think if we can, you know, going with this idea that we are essentially tuning into these different moments, we're tuning into these different frequencies, either see ourselves, see another moment. I think if we can learn to control that, then we will be able to stay within that moment for longer periods of time. And I hearken back to the movie Somewhere in Time, starring
Mhm.
Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. I
Mhm.
think the writer Richard Matheson was really onto something there, and for his research it was originally a novel and then developed into the movie. He actually, consulted, significant books on time, on the theories of time and what how time works and the idea of time travel and all that. And he incorporated that into a story. So, you know, uh, Christopher Reeve's character Richard essentially wills his consciousness from 1980 back
Mhm.
to 1912. He basically tricks himself into believing the subliminal messages, dressing up in the garb of the era, getting all the modern amenities out of his room, and wills himself back to that year. And he,
Yeah.
ends up in the, same room that he had come from, just 1912 instead of 1980. And he did it all with the mind. And I think it's, like I said, I think Matheson was really onto something there. It would be more like that than
And
a
and
machine.
and I think the mind is where it's all at. And I think you've really on something here because we really don't understand the power of our own brain. I talk about this a lot. People say that we only use 20% of our brain. The truth is we use 100%. We only know what 20% of it does. So
Yeah.
what will the uh, inner portions, the inner walls of our mind tell us that we're able to do. I mean, look at things like Uri Geller. I mean, kind of getting off on a
Mhm.
different subject here, but look what Uri Geller could do with his mind bending spoons. Look what remote viewers can do. So
Yeah, absolutely.
there's so many things in our with our brain that we don't understand yet. And I think you've really hit on something there. When we can somehow learn how to harness that, that might be the entire key. Are you familiar with the Philip experiment out of Toronto back in the
I can't
70s?
say that I am. Yeah.
It was an interesting and, as we're getting closer to our next break here,
Mm.
it was an interesting, experiment done in Toronto. I wanna say 71, 72. A group not unlike mine, decided to do an experiment. They created, a guy named Philip. They gave him a dossier, wife, kids, whatever,
Mhm.
and they built him on paper, and then they did a closed investigation, seances, if you will. They, taped it, they filmed it rather, and they audio taped it, and they actually got data saying that Philip was there, but the problem was Philip was their creation.
Okay, so that's going down the line of like the idea of the Buddhist thought form, or what we would call a tulpa, where you've actually, created a sentient being from
Mhm.
your own thoughts.
Yes,
Yeah, that's yeah.
fascinating stuff, but nonetheless, it goes to the discussion of how powerful our
Mhm.
brain is and what we can do with it. And with that, I gotta take another break, but we'll be back in just a few minutes, folks. Interesting conversation. I hope you'll come on back and hear the rest of this because 'cause we've got a whole 'nother section to talk chat about. So be right back in a minute. And we're back with this really interesting conversation with Mike RECKSECKER. But before we get going, I want to remind everybody to take a look at what we're doing at the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation. And you can see that by going to paranormalfbi.com, our website. You can check us out on Facebook, also with IndianRiverHauntings.com and our Facebook, YouTube channel at Indian River Hauntings 2341. And check us out at X Zone, I'm sorry, at Ghost Guy at paranormalstakeout.org if you want to get a hold of us. I do want to make mention to check out all the other great programming here on the X Zone Radio and TV Broadcast Network. www.xzbn.net is a great way to get there, or you can check me out directly at paranormalstakeout.org. Mike, How can
Larry.
folks find you? How can folks find out about you?
Yeah, you can find me, MikeRickSecker.com. I'm all over social media. So, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all those sorts of things. Also ConnectedUniversePortal.com, which is my online learning platform and a wonderful community of people that we have out there that are, basically going down this rabbit hole of research.
Rabbit Hole. Sounds familiar. I think I heard of a show named Rabbit Hole.
Yeah, Edge of the Rabbit Hole. That's
Mhm.
that's one of my podcasts. Yeah.
Yeah. So check him out, folks. Interesting stuff. And we're not going to cover everything I want to cover. I can tell you that right now. But I want to get back to this time thing because I just find that the power of the brain and how you've described the use of the ability of the brain with this stacked time theory is it's just really fascinating to me. But do you find that there are people out there that travel through these stack of photographs, which I'm going to use as a regular description now, go through these stack of photographs at will?
I
Just
think I think there have been people that have figured that out. Maybe it's people from the future that have figured it out. I think our ancients knew how to do this
Mhm,
long ago, way back in the day, and that's one of the functions of the stone circles, or even the pyramids and
mhm,
these sorts of things. In ancient Egypt, I have a whole Stargates of Ancient Egypt tour where we go to these locations that are designated as actual Stargate locations there in Egypt. And the question is, okay, where did they go? Did they go to some other place in the cosmos? Did they go to another place on Earth? Did they go to another point in time? All these options are there on the table. So,
yes.
um,
This Stargate tour, is this a physical tour you take, or do you
yeah,
do it online?
yeah, this
Wow.
is a physical tour. We go to Egypt. We're going April 16th to the 28th in 2024. That's it's an annual tour that we do, and we hit. It's 12 days. We hit so many of the different temples. Of course, the pyramids. We have 2 hours, just our small group to ourselves in the Great Pyramid of Giza. The whole thing's opened up to us, which is wonderful. So yeah, there's a lot of 4 day Nile cruise. No,
Oh, wow.
it's a
Well,
great time. Yeah.
okay, I have to check that out myself. How does this how does this connect with the Mandela effect? That's something that's been very
Yeah.
popular and discussed about a lot, in recent times. How does this connect with the Mandela effect? And what is the Mandela effect for those that don't know?
Yeah, the Mandela effect is this idea that essentially something's been changed in the timeline, that there are large amounts of people that remember something from the past, uh, all of them remembering it identically, but yet when you actually look into the past, then it's no, that's not the way it was. And this came about, we call it the Mandela effect, because when Nelson Mandela passed away in 2013, there were a ton of people that had this memory of him passing away when he was incarcerated back in the 80s. And so Fiona Broom is the one that coined this term and did some research on this. And there's a lot of these different things around where a lot of it is branding centric. So like the Fruit
Christine
of the Looms,
Bears. Yeah.
Berenstain Bears, Cornucopia, and Fruit of the Loom. Fruit Loops was, had a different spelling, Oscar Mayer, all these different things. Now, I do believe that many of these things are related to something. Yeah, something was changed in the timeline. Now, that doesn't mean somebody from like 2285 is going back in time to change the spelling of Fruit Loops. It's too trivial to do that. I think they're going back, and they might just be to watch and observe, or maybe they're gathering some sort of resource, and there are repercussions, a ripple effect, like the butterfly effect
Mhm.
that's happening. Some uh, unbeknownst to them, repercussion happens because of one little thing that they did over here, or maybe they crossed the street and the car was turning, had to slow down, and that just had this cascading effect over so many other things. You just don't know. So
Mhm.
I think it's a result of time travel activity and just these repercussions that we didn't know were going to happen.
So time travel is occurring now. That's kind of what I'm
Yeah.
hearing from you. Yeah. That's interesting because you hear so much, especially on the internet, and everything on the
Well,
internet's is truthful. Uh,
well, yeah, of course. Well, I think it's because we have this preconception of what time travel is supposed to look like. You go back to H.G. Wells and the Time Machine. You could go to, of course, flux capacitor and a DeLorean. We always think it has to be like, this machine, and
Machine.
it's using, gigawatts of energy, and and our physicists will say, well, it's possible if you had the right amount of energy, if you harnessed all the energy of the sun. Well, yeah, if you harness all the energy of the sun on the planet Earth, you're going to destroy the planet. Or they'll say, well, you could, slingshot yourself around a black hole, and around the black hole, space and time works, differently, bends time, and it's like, yeah, we're not getting to a black hole anytime soon. So they put these ideas out there that we just can't physically make happen right now at all. So it's given us this, this idea that time travel can't happen at all. And what's fascinating is, okay, so a lot of our scribes, or a lot of our writers, and they come up with these different paradoxes, and they play out wonderfully in different science fiction stories and thrillers and mind-bending type stories. Many of them use like the grandfather paradox, which we saw in Back to the Future. You go back in time, you do something to disrupt your own birth, and you'll disappear. And that academia will say, well, that's just a storytelling device. Yet in the 1980s, there was a proposition, it was the Novikov consistency principle. And with this, it basically stated that time travel could physically be possible, but you couldn't change anything because the math wouldn't come out to zero. It would change the remainder in the equation, and that just wouldn't jive. So you could go back in time, but you can't change anything. So two physicists, Kip Thorne and Joel Polchinski, are having this discussion. And so Polchinski throws out this idea to Kip Thorne. He's like, well, if you take a billiard ball and you use the Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole, we can talk about Einstein-Rosen bridge and a wormhole, because this is something that we already have established in our theoretical physics. So if we take this billiard ball and we shoot it through this Einstein-Rosen bridge, and we set up the bridge so that the exit of it is just before the billiard ball goes into the wormhole, and it knocks the billiard ball off course, then you've changed time. And they call this the Polchinski paradox.
Right.
The thing is, though, if you look at that, how is that different than the grandfather paradox? You've gone back in time and changed this outcome from occurring. Instead of killing your grandfather and preventing your birth, you are knocking the billiard ball off course to prevent it from going into the wormhole to begin with. It's the same thing, but we can talk about it because we're physicists and we're using the Einstein-Rosen bridge.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now,
So I find
so
that
how
humorous.
that is actually watch a show called I don't know if I can mention it, but I'm going to Bodies. It's on one of the streaming channels. Take
Okay.
a look at that. You'll
I'll
find
check
that
that out. I'm
fascinating.
not familiar with
Bodies.
it, but I'll
Yeah,
take a look. Yeah.
watch. It's a mini series. But anyway, how does this attach to ETs? Now, this is one thing that's actually happening quite a bit in the paranormal field now. You're finding folks connecting Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs, and aliens all together into this time dimensional issue. What do you
Yeah, there's
theorize? Do you theorize that ETs or aliens are connected here?
yeah, I mean it's all connected. They're all, everything in the universe is connected, which is why I have my whole connected universe platform. That doesn't mean they all come from the exact same place, but just by the very nature that we're all within the universe, and the universe is whole. We're all connected. You look physically at the Chandra X-ray imagery of the universe, and you find these galaxies all connected to each other through gaseous filaments. It's a wonderful X-ray photo, but yeah. So, okay, we're talking ETs. This is a hole we could go down for a while. We only have a few minutes left, but
That's true.
yeah. But okay, ETs. Some of them I'll say this. Some of them, yes, are physical beings that have come here, some sort of craft from another place in the cosmos. Maybe they're using a wormhole or something like that to travel here to explain, the space flight or whatever.
Mhm.
We would have to dive into that a bit more, but some of them are
Um,
physical. Some of them are interdimensional beings that have come here from some maybe fifth, sixth, seventh, and what have you. Sure, that happens. We see accounts of that in our history, not talking ETs, but other beings that are very, very eerily similar in nature, with the whole abduction scenario and all that. But
mhm.
maybe they're a fairy or some other being that our ancestors talked about. And now we're talking about them as ETs. Some of them could also be time travelers as well from some other point in time that have shown up here. I've seen some people say, well, all this ET and UAP stuff, they're not extraterrestrial. They're just us from another point in time. Well, maybe some of them are, but I'll say this: just because they are time traveler doesn't necessarily mean that they are human. Millions of years from now, there could be another intelligent life form that springs up on this earth that
Interesting
develops
theory.
civilization and time travel and all that, or it could even be an extraterrestrial from another place in the cosmos that has established something here on Earth millions of years from now and also has developed time travel capability. And they show up, and so then it would be an extraterrestrial that is native here to Earth, but is still time traveling. So there's a lot of different ways that
Well,
we can look at all this.
I'll throw something else at you. Another thing I like to bring up, quite frankly, and in our last minute, we're not gonna be able to get into it,
Mhm.
but the collective conscious theory, because everything is
Yes.
connected. Is that because everything's connected?
Well, that's basically, I call it eternal knowledge. Yeah, Jung had the
Yeah.
collective unconscious. People talk about the Akashic records. Again, I think they're all related. I think we may almost all be talking about the same thing here, but it is
Mhm. We
knowledge
are.
that is out there eternally for us to be able
Mhm.
to tap into. Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, this is a rabbit hole we could go down, and we're gonna maybe have to do this again
Sure.
to further examine this. Very interesting show, and I do appreciate you being with us tonight, Mike. Thank you so much, and stay safe. And folks, we've come to the end of our show tonight, so I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight. Please check us out on the X Zone Radio and TV Broadcast Network. And until we get to meet again, I'll get it out right. Till we meet again, please take care of yourselves, love your family, hug your kids, and we'll see you on the other side. Have a good night, folks.